Welcome to my world. Okay, so what we have here is a Husqvarna HU625 all-wheel drive, or HU625AWD self-propelled lawnmower. I am working on this mower because I really don't want to buy a new one. I want to get a ride-on mower eventually for my half-acre of grass, but that obviously is not cheap, and to buy a new push mower right now and then trade up to a ride-on mower next year or the year after, it doesn't seem worth the money. So I'm trying to rehabilitate my push mower. Note the nice 3-year warranty, where all these problems have occurred in the 4th year. I bought this in 2015 and it is now 2019. So the problems with this mower are all with the engine. First, this, which is the oil sump, the crankcase oil sump, this part cracked, and I did take a swat at repairing it, and the repair so far is holding, although the engine has not run or the mower been used yet. It is February and the grass is not growing in February in North Carolina, so that'll have to wait. But I did use an aluminum brazing rod called Alumalloy to repair the crack both inside the crankcase and outside the crankcase, and the oil leak seems to have stopped. It was a pretty big oil leak, and so we'll see if the Alumalloy holds over time when this motor starts running and vibrating like crazy and whatnot. So I also have an oil leak here. This is the breather valve tube, which runs into the underside of this pan, and in order to get at the breather, the oil breather, I call it a valve, it's a reed. In order to get at that, I need to take this flywheel off. The interesting thing about this flywheel is that I have not been able to find any information on how to get this flywheel off the quote proper way, unquote. Most of these Briggs Stratton flywheels, these two holes are tapped, and you get a small pulley that you can purchase on Amazon for like 13 bucks, or puller I should say, and you pop the flywheel off easy peasy, as they say. In my case, this flywheel, those two holes are not tapped. And there are, as you can see from this, from how I've got this other puller arranged, there are a couple of holes on the flywheel that fit this type of puller, but there's only 2, there's not 3. So I have fashioned a bracket to grab the underside of the pulley on the 3rd side, and this is actually off a U-bolt, the bracket that is, and I just bent it into an L shape, and it's not perfectly aligned, but we're going to see if this works. If it doesn't work, then the next step is going to be to drill and tap those holes, and then I'll use some scrap metal I've got lying around to build my own flywheel puller, see if that works. If it doesn't work, then I might have to get some square stock from somewhere that's a little bit beefier. I have some fairly thick, I think it's 1/8 inch flat iron. If I double that up, it probably will have enough resistance over that span, which is 1.5 inches, to pull this flywheel off, but we'll see. So hopefully this improvised method will work. We're about to find out, and if it doesn't, then I'm going to have to go to plan B, drill and tap out those holes, and then build a bar to go across it and get some bolts to go through it, so on and so forth, for my own puller. So I'm not going to force this since it is a bit sketchy, and this flywheel is made of aluminum, and it's probably not made of very high grade aluminum, so it could crack or break. I don't want to do either of those things, since the objective here is to keep this thing going for a couple more years when I'm ready to purchase a ride-on mower. So we'll see how this goes. And so let me get the camera set up so I can use both hands, and we'll see if this pulley puller arrangement works. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. So we're going to give this a shot and see if this puller, I keep saying pulley, this puller is going to remove this flywheel at all, or we're going to have to try something else. So let's see. I'm being stupid here. I'm dealing with something under pressure. And I should have safety glasses on, so let me put them on. Okay. Nope, it's not working. My little L bracket is bending. Let's just give it a whack with a hammer and see if it'll pop. Nope, she's on there good and tight. So, alright, so this was a fail. We're going to have to build a puller. Kind of weird that this seems to be an unusual model of a Husqvarna lawnmower, because I can find very little information on it. There's plenty of videos on the on YouTube for other models of Husqvarna, and lots of videos on how to remove one of these flywheels using these two holes, which are not tapped on my flywheel. On many other versions, they come from the factory, drilled and tapped. So what I'm now going to do is I am going to drill out these two holes to 17/64ths, and that is the tap drill size for a 5/16 by 18 bolt. The 18 signifies number of threads per inch. So what I'm going to do. And I'll drill and tap these holes now, and then we'll have another interruption while I go around and find some of that scrap iron and get that scrap iron drilled out and whatnot, ready to act as a puller, and see if that's successful. If it isn't, then, as I said, I may have to go out and get some sort of bar stock, something a little bit thicker and beefier that won't bend, which is a very real possibility. So let's drill these holes out. By the way, these holes are not through. They're not through holes, so I just drilled them out until they bottomed out, and now I'm going to tap them. But before I tap them, I want to get the vacuum out and clean away these chips. So vacuum's right over here. So there is one possibility here that I have considered in drilling out these holes, is that there are other holes drilled into this flywheel that are clearly, to me, an indication that this flywheel has been balanced. Now, by removing the material, I may have thrown that balance out of whack, and which means that potentially, when this motor's running, it could vibrate like the dickens if this thing is severely thrown out of balance. I doubt if that's going to happen, but it's a possibility. So I will simply have to remember that, and also I will have to mark this side. The hole is a little bit larger than this side, so if I've got too much material removed, it's going to be on this side, which means that I would need to drill some additional holes out here. I will mark that. I don't have a Sharpie, or do I have a, yes I do have a Sharpie. So I'll mark that now, just to tell me that this is the side where the hole was a bit larger, which means that I've removed more material on this side of the flywheel than that side. So if it is severely out of balance, I will have to drill a small counter hole on this side if it's necessary. I don't think it will be, but I'm just pointing that out. I've got my tap set up. Do I have some oil for this hole? I probably don't need it, but it couldn't hurt. Let me see. Where did my oil go? This is not. I'll use some marrow oil. I have some tap oil somewhere, but I don't see it. Again, for soft aluminum, probably isn't necessary, but what harm could it possibly do to lubricate up the tap? And again, this is a 5/16 by 18 tap, and the hole was drilled out 1764. So if you look that up on the interweb, you'll see that for a 5/16 tap, it calls for a 1764 drill. Okay, for those of you not familiar with tapping, I learned this when I was working in a machine shop in my post-high school days. Give it 1 or 2 revolutions, and then back off a quarter turn, and then continue on. What that does is that allows the chips that build up in between the flutes to separate so that they don't bind into the threads, and you could potentially wind up snapping a tap if it binds up too much and you're applying too much force. And I think I've hit bottom there, and that would be a bad day. So we don't want that to happen. And so that's why you should back off every 2 or 3 turns or so. It really depends on the metal that you're trying to tap. If it was stainless steel, for instance, a hard steel, I would say do a maximum of 2 turns, 1 to 2 turns, then back off a quarter turn, 1 to 2 more turns, back off a quarter turn. Also, when you're tapping a blind hole like this, you've got to be gentle in the sense that you don't want to slam into the bottom. Taps, the tool steel that's used for taps is fairly brittle. So if you slam into the bottom of a blind hole, you're going to snap the tap off. You'd be amazed at how easy it is to do that. And once you've got that tap stuck in the hole, you're going to have a devil of a time getting that tap out, if you can get it out at all without ruining the part. So that's 2 full turns of good bite, so back off. Back off. Back off. And that feels like I've hit bottom. And when I say it feels like I've hit bottom, I'm meeting more resistance than normal when I'm just turning the tap. So Now we've got our two holes tapped for a 5/16 18 bolt. I don't know if I have a 5/16 18 bolt. I'm going to have to look in my various boxes of bolts to see if I have one. I might have to go to the store to get one. If I do, my preference would be to use stainless steel because it's a harder material. If you just use zinc bolts, you might wind up stripping the threads, and of course, since this is aluminum, there's a risk that the threads on the aluminum body could be stripped as well. It's just something that we're going to have to be gentle with and see how far we can get. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. If I can't, the mower will work without this particular fix. What's happening is, because that oil breather valve, which is roughly here underneath this pan, is leaking, oil is slowly coming out of this tube, the breather tube, which leads to, when it's on, the air cleaner housing. So the air cleaner gets a good bath of oil at the bottom of it. That's where the oil collects, at the bottom of the air cleaner, and so you wind up ruining your air filters by fouling them with oil. Of course, as you're mowing the lawn and you're kicking up dust and whatever, that dust immediately sticks to the dirt that's being sucked into the air filter when the motor's running, and so it clogs fairly quickly. So this is not an absolutely essential repair, but it's kind of a might as well thing, where since I've got the motor all apart, I might as well keep going. The front, let me drop this down a little bit. This front overhead, the valve cover is also leaking oil. I've got a gasket, a replacement gasket on order for that as well. In for a penny, in for a pound. I am taking a little bit of a risk in the sense of I could put all these parts on and this thing could wind up cracking again on the first use, in which case I've wasted my money. But these parts are not expensive. The reed, the oil breather reed, costs I think $4.90. The gasket for the valve cover, or the rocker arm cover rather, roughly the same amount. So it's not a huge investment, and if it encourages this motor to last me 2 more years, then it's worth the trouble. So that's where we're at. I'm going to stop recording until I get to the next step of obtaining the bolts and working out the arrangement for an improvised pulley puller. And if I can't improvise it successfully, I might go out and order a Briggs Stratton puller. I just need to get the right one because there are 3 different sizes. For this particular flywheel, it's about 1.5 inches from center to center on these 2 holes. So if I take my caliper and I guesstimate at what the center is, and it comes up to, yeah, it comes up to 1.5 or 1.5 inches. So I just need to make sure that if I wind up going the route of getting the tool from Briggs Stratton, which you can get on Amazon for $12 or thereabout, I just need to make sure it's the right size tool that will span the necessary space. I don't know about the bolts, but I can deal with different size bolts. That would not be an issue. So onward and upward. We will, for you it'll be a second, and for me it could be anywhere from a few hours to a few days. So we will see each other again soon. Until then. We're back. It's actually been a couple of days, and what I decided after looking for gear to improvise a puller with, I decided, as I mentioned before, since this puller only cost $12, that I might as well just order it. So that's what I did. Ordered it through Amazon Prime. And there are 3 different models for this puller, and I ordered the model that looked like it was going to be the one that fit. And I don't know if you can see it or not from these bolts, but there's a bit of a taper, which means that it's not the right puller. And these are not the original bolts. These are the original bolts, and they're also self-tapping, which is something that I did not see mentioned on the Amazon description. Although since I went back, I was curious about that. I saw a comment or a question in the review section, which mentioned that these are self-tapping bolts, which I thought was kind of interesting. But we're past that because I've already tapped these two holes for 5/16 by 18, 5/16 by 18 bolts. So I decided to go with what I've got, and what I've done here is I've improvised a spacer out of a socket and a couple of washers to tighten this up, so that theoretically when I tighten these bolts it should lift the flywheel up off the crank arbor, but we'll see. So we're going to give this a shot and see if it works. The only thing I'm concerned about here is because this is aluminum, there is a possibility that based on the fact that these are not perfectly vertical, they're a little bit off, I could wind up putting the wrong kind of pressure on these aluminum threads and just wind up pulling the threads out of the aluminum flywheel. But nothing ventured, nothing gained. We've got no other choice, so I'm going to start slowly tightening these, and we'll see how much courage I have to keep going before potentially doing some harm. And we didn't do any harm because guess what? It just popped. So even though this is not exactly the right puller, this Briggs Stratton puller device, with my little improvisation of washers and a socket and the 5/16 by 18 tapped bolt holes, we have successfully gotten the flywheel off. Now, as I pull this thing off, you got to be careful because there's a key in here. We don't want to lose that. It feels like it's pretty firm. No, it didn't move. I want to pull that out, now so that it doesn't disappear on me. And we're back into the slot. There is what I'm referring to, that key. We don't want to lose that. So we'll set this aside in a relatively safe space, and we've got our flywheel off, and we'll set that aside as well. So now we're ready to take this sheet metal tray off to get at the oil breather underneath it. Before I do that, I do have the reed. It came in today, so I'm going to go get that part and clean this up a little bit. There's debris down in there, so get the vacuum out, whatever. Since I have to step away anyway, I'm going to stop the video and I'll restart it in just a second. Okay, I'm back. So let me clean this out first. This is what we were after, replacing this reed part. It's down here in the bottom part of this bag. Part number 697124, Briggs Stratton. And as I said, this tray needs to come off. Let's see if I've got a socket out here already that will do that. And that was too small. And that was a 7mm, so what do we have here? And that's a little bit too big. And that's a 9mm. So we know that we need an 8. And that's the 8. So let's see if it'll come off of this. There's one. There's 2. Three, and there should be this one. Nope, 2 more it looks like. Okay, total of 5 8mm nuts, and I think let's take that and put it aside. There is no oil in the engine because of the fun stuff that we've been doing to fix the crankcase oil sump. So there's only a little bit of residual oil down there. That should not be a problem. But we're going to take a clean paper towel and we're going to plug the oil hole because we don't want debris falling down in there and causing us a lot of misery after all the work that we've done on this engine. I think it's also fair to point out, well, fair or not fair, but this is the most extensive work that I have ever done on a lawnmower other than change spark plug. And I think I may have mentioned it before, but I'll say it again. The reason I'm doing all this is because I have a half-acre property that I moved into this house last year, and prior to that I had a very small yard that I could cut the lawn in about 20 minutes, less than a quarter of an acre, and even less of that quarter of an acre was actual grass. And there we go. I want to step up to a riding lawnmower at some point, but I do not have the money for that just yet. So I'm thinking next year, possibly the year after, it'll be in the budget. But for now, it is not. I don't know what a good versus what a bad reed looks like, so I am replacing it simply because this tube is getting oil into it and leaking into the air cleaner, and I will show that to you so that you see why I'm going after the reed. There's the air cleaner, the bottom of which is situated like this, and the bottom of which is getting soaked with oil. Didn't always used to be that way when I first bought this lawnmower, so I'm assuming that this is a problem. And if it turns out that I'm wrong and that this is part of the engine operation, well, then I've replaced this reed and spent $4 and some amount of time for nothing. So let's find out what size that is. It's a very small socket. Too small. Just right. And this is 5.5 millimeter to get this reed off. And there's the reed. It's not very stiff, but again, I have no way of knowing what's good or what's bad. This is my first foray this deep into a motor like this. Okay. I wonder why that whole, oh no, it's not optical illusion. It looked threaded, but it isn't. Okay, let's get this part out here. And I got this part and the other parts for this motor from partstree.com. They're not paying me to plug them. I'm just telling you where I got it. I will say, as kind of an impromptu user review, that I didn't have any issues with Partstree, and they shipped this stuff pretty quickly. I think I got it in 3 days, and it showed up in my postal mailbox. Okay, so let's just clean, make sure that that doesn't have any goop on it. It doesn't. Feels the same. I have my doubts about this, people. Whether this is necessary, I mean, or whether that oil is just a characteristic of this motor. I couldn't find any information on it online, and as I've mentioned before, there's very little that I could find anyway, and I don't consider myself a complete slouch when it comes to Google searches, but I couldn't look at any direct information on this 25EX, or very little, I should say, on this 625EX motor. So that is what it is. Now, before I can reassemble this, I'm going to clean this up. There's a form-a-gasket on the bottom of this, which I'm going to need to remove, and there's also form-a-gasket residue on the top of this surface, which I'm also going to have to remove, and I'm assuming that nobody's really interested in the tedium of watching me take that off. So I'm going to stop the video at this point. I will work at that, and once this is clean and ready to reassemble, I will turn the camera back on. So once again, not sure how long it'll take, whether I'll do it this evening because it's now nighttime, or whether I will do it tomorrow, but whatever, it'll be just a few seconds for you guys. So until then. Hey, I'm back. Well, sorry to those of you watching this video, but my wonderful video camera ran out of power, and I didn't realize it until after I had cleaned this thing off and had put out the gasket maker material on it. So I was committed to mounting this thing, and unfortunately I was not able to video it. Now, what you're looking at here is the aftermath. I put some gasket maker around the perimeter of that breather reed, and I did both sides, both on the engine head side. I went around the perimeter of the opening and I put gasket maker on that, and on the underside of this I cleaned it off completely of the previous gasket material using Scotch-Brite pad and a little bit of acetone to help it along. Then I put it on and I left it for an hour. That's according to the instructions for the Permatex gasket maker, where you're supposed to seat it but not hunker it down for an hour, and then after an hour you go back and you tighten it all, and that's where we are an hour later. And so I will tighten all these nuts up for you and me. Remember not to over tighten, because this is all aluminum, and if you go hog wild you could wind up in a world of hurt. You definitely do not want to strip out the threads, because that will complicate life quite a bit. Okay, that's tight. Now we can put the flywheel back on. And so we've got this all cleaned up. And we have to align our key, our notch for the key with the notch on the flywheel. Pull that pad back. Screwdriver, big screwdriver. That looks lined up to me. And what I was just doing there is there's a spring-loaded part, I think it's either the throttle or the cutoff back here, and there's a pad that goes up against the flywheel, and so I had to pull it out in order for the flywheel to seat properly. And now I need to get the keyway. Which way is this oriented? I think it was. Try the other way. Give it a love tap or two. This way. I guess so. Okay. Looks secured that way. And now I'm looking for, I think I'm missing a washer here. Too many paper towels from our cleaning effort. Sorry for the bump. No? Well, I left all the parts inside that thing, inside that little cup, so I thought there was a washer. I kind of don't like that. I kind of don't like that, people. There might be a washer missing. I don't think I'm going to button this down. I think I'm going to keep looking for that washer. Or keep looking for a washer to make sure that I am not hallucinating here. I just don't see one lying around. But anyway, so that's the principle of it. And what I will do is eventually I will take my where'd it go? I will take my impact wrench like so. Just a couple of taps for now until I satisfy myself on whether or not there's supposed to be a washer there. Let's see if I have dropped something on the floor or it's somewhere else on this messy workbench, what have you. But that's the principle of it. There is a torque specification for this. I don't know what it is. I'll see if I can find out on the internet before I button this thing up. But I think I want to clean my workbench off a little bit and see if there is in fact something buried under here that might be a washer that goes between that nut and the base of the pull mechanism. So we'll see about that. So that's another one down. I still have to replace the rocker arm gasket, which I also got in the mail today. But it's ready to fire up. I still have to put this back on. It was a good idea to stick some there we go. Okay, now I can put some oil in it, and we're getting closer to starting this thing back up and seeing how well all of these repairs have done. Hopefully they will hold and I'll get another year or two out of this thing before I'm ready to buy a riding mower for my half acre of suburbia to cut the lawn, but we'll see. It is kind of irritating that we've had to go through all of this, not we, but I've had to go through all of this trouble for a lawnmower that is only 4 years old. Anyway, I'm gonna stop the filming at this point, and I will resume it when I'm ready for the next step, which is I've got also the belt to replace, and one of the pulleys was pretty badly damaged, so for the drive, so we'll replace the pulley for the drive as well. I have to do that before I put the oil in, so I'll do that next. But before any of that, I'm going to clean up my workbench and I'm going to look to see if I have misplaced a washer anywhere before I tighten that up. And if I find the spec, I'll tell you what it is. So we'll be back at some point in the near future. Just a few seconds again for you guys.